You're live.
Hello, my name is Dennis Speed, and I want to welcome everybody to tonight's Friday episode of the New York Symposium with Diane Sare. We've got several things we're going to be talking about tonight. We have a panel that is going to be addressing several matters, and we'll be using the present context of the battle around the elections to try to lift everybody's sight above what you're hearing about, sort of the day-to-day elements of that battle, to kind of look at what the overall and overarching picture is. When you're talking about Donald Trump of New York or Giuliani of New York, or you're talking about Wall Street, you're talking about us, or Mike Bloomberg in a different way. All of these individuals are playing a very particular role in the world right now, which should be looked at completely differently than the way in which it's being discussed in the mainstream media, as it's called. The attorney for Donald Trump, Sidney Powell, in a press conference yesterday, referred to the way in which the electoral process was, in fact, stolen from candidate Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and referred to forces which are international. She referenced the nations of Germany, of Venezuela, of Argentina, and she talked about how some of the software and programs were used to alter what she called millions of votes. Today's press has tried to make light of that, or try to pretend that that could not be true. But the fact is that not only is the capability in existence, it's been used many, many times by American intelligence services in the period after 9/11. 9/11, of course, then rings a certain bell when you talk about New York City. And therefore, when you're talking about this array of circumstances and discussions, it's useful to get past the shadows or the footprints to get at the actual reality. Some of us, including Diane, have been involved for decades now in getting at what people often refer to as the secret government and the agenda of the so-called secret government. Often these things are mystified. They're made very difficult for people to understand. And a lot of the reason that that is successful is because of the lack of an understanding of the historical circumstances, as well as the international circumstances that surround what goes on. In other words, the idea would be you have to lift yourself above the immediate space and time that you think you're contained in to get to real physical space and real physical time. And those are concepts which are much different than the ideological constructs that tend to blanket people's actual perceptions. So what we want to do tonight is we want to have several people speak to you. That's going to include, we'll start, of course, with Diane, but also Richard Black, who is the representative of the Schiller Institute at the United Nations, and also Jason Ross, who is, he works with the LaRouche Science team, and he is also the co-author of actually 2 or more actual special reports, particularly exploring what people talk about all the time as the Belt and Road Initiative of China, but he talks about it as the New Silk Road becoming the world land bridge. This is actually a global process, which is much different than has been described. Now, again, this has eminently to do with the actual day-to-day and hour-by-hour battle around the elections. But in order to give you a real understanding of that, we want to take the opportunity to give you what no one else will give you, the truth. So we're going to start with Diane, and then from there, we'll be hearing from Richard, and then followed by Jason. So Diane.
Great, thanks very much, Dennis. What I want to do is actually take a step back to 1988. Lyndon LaRouche and his wife, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, went to the Kempinski Hotel, interestingly, on Columbus Day, and gave a press conference where he called for the reunification of Germany. And he said that the Soviet bloc was failing economically, and that he would like to make an offer that the United States would feed Poland in return for the Soviet Union allowing the reunification of Germany. And at the time, I was a college student at New England Conservatory in Massachusetts, and I think many other people thought this was really wild. I mean, here was LaRouche, a presidential candidate. He'd been indicted in Boston. There was a trial, witch hunt going on against him. And he's in Germany talking about the reunification of Germany as part of his presidential campaign. But what did he know? He knew that he had been Ronald Reagan's back channel for a policy that LaRouche himself designed to take the threat of thermonuclear war off the table. The Strategic Defense Initiative, the laser defense against nuclear missiles. And he told the Soviet Union, who rejected Reagan's proffer to develop it jointly, he said, if you go off and build this on your own, try to build it on your own, you're going to cannibalize your economy, and I predict that you are going to disintegrate. You're going to go bankrupt and disintegrate within 5 years. Well, he was exactly and precisely correct. So fast forward, a year after he gives this incredible address at the Kempinski Hotel, when he himself is already in prison, the Berlin Wall comes down and Germany is reunified. A year after that, exactly as he warned. And at the time, he and his wife said, look, just because the communist system is bankrupt does not mean a great victory for the liberal free trade system of the British Empire. That system is also going to collapse, and it's going to be a much bigger collapse, and it's going to reach gale force inside the United States. Now, I, in my youthful enthusiasm, imagined that this was going to happen within a few weeks. I thought everything was going to go and we'd have a chance to create a whole new monetary system or all just disintegrate in disaster. But they were able to come up with all kinds of new speculative bubbles, and this inevitable collapse was put off for some time, although the collapse in the standard of living absolutely occurred. And people can think about how many hours you have to work a week to support a decent standard of living. How many jobs does that require versus what one person working 40 hours a week could afford to pay for in the 1960s or early 70s. So by 2008, and again, LaRouche had said in 2007, July, that there was no possibility of a non-collapse, none. 2008, it hits with full force, and we have the bailout rammed through by Barack Obama in the Senate. I guess it was Hank Paulson who came to the Congress to threaten people that there was going to be, blood in the streets and riots if they didn't get the bailout, and we just began printing money like crazy. We're now at a point where that can no longer be sustained. There's a revolt against it in the Western world, just as the LaRouches warned. You saw it with the Brexit vote. And to get an understanding of what's happening this time, I want to go to 2016. Remember, you had 17 intelligence agencies deployed to stop President Donald Trump from becoming president. You had Hillary Clinton, you might remember, she was speaking at Goldman Sachs events. She was getting paid $300,000 a pop every time she spoke. I could see paying her that much not to speak, but at any rate, and she was lying and telling them one thing about what she was going to do in terms of world trade and free trade and so on, and then she'd come out and tell the voters something exactly opposite. Well, what they could not ever imagine happening occurred, which is Donald Trump won that election. And for this, he could not be forgiven. And you've had a mobilization over these 4 years coordinated out of the bowels of the British Empire, the Bank of England, the House of Lords, the royal family pushing their green agenda, but also to destroy the Trump presidency and to destroy the sovereignty of nations. And what I think Richard will go through, and Jason in some extent, is to give you an understanding of what's happened internationally and why it's so crucial that the British reverse the American Revolution and regain control of the United States, because there's a new paradigm already very advanced and very much underway. And it would be the most natural thing for the United States to become part of it and to play ultimately a leading role as we revive our space program and certain scientific capabilities. So what's happening is, one, they're trying to steal the election from President Trump. Two, they are planning, and I'm holding in my hands a resolution that was written by Mrs. LaRouche for world circulation. It's on the page of the Schiller Institute. It's called Resolution for a Worldwide Resistance to Global Fascism, Stop the Central Bank Takeover. And it begins 75 years after the end of World War II. The world is threatened with a new fascist dictatorship. It comes this time in the form of an attempt by the City of London, Wall Street, and various leading central banks to consolidate total control over all financial investments for the benefit of the super rich at the expense of the middle classes and the poor worldwide. On January 23rd in Davos, Switzerland, they are going to be holding the World Economic Forum. Last year, Trump upended it by being bold enough to say the world wasn't doomed by climate change and to talk about the Italian Renaissance. But while people like George Soros chewed the rug and said Trump had to be overthrown, Bill Gates, Greta Thunberg, the poor abused climate girl, all were there gnashing their teeth. Now, this year, what they want to do is go for a global cryptocurrency and digitalized bank accounts, because if you have cash, you can't go into negative interest rates because there's something that actually exists. So if everything is converted to be digitalized, the banks can devalue your bank account without even telling you, with the flick of a switch. They also, given our surveillance state, will have total knowledge of everything you purchase. They can even prevent you from being able to pay for certain things. It will be a complete fascist dictatorship, and they will only allow investments in so-called green New Deal, green, which means no carbon emissions, which means no energy. We don't yet have a thermonuclear fusion reactor. We don't have enough fission reactors. And frankly, these guys don't support that because they think the world should be depopulated. So what you're looking at is creating conditions where the standard of living worldwide collapses dramatically, and you get an extreme increase in the death rate from pandemic disease, as we have starvation, as we have on a massive scale, with over 7 million people already dead this year of starvation and 30 million imminently threatened. So they intend to impose this on the world, and Mrs. LaRouche said, no, we should not allow that. And what we should do is get Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws, starting with Glass-Steagall bank separation everywhere on the planet, a credit system, low interest, long-term credit, and cooperation on scientific breakthroughs, particularly fusion, but those things which will allow every single citizen on the planet to be more productive, which will give each one of us more power over an ability to change the universe. So this is very, very real. This is why the stakes are so high. They were high in 2016, but they're much higher now because the old system is absolutely at its end, and we have an opportunity to do something that's actually great, and frankly is probably beyond the imagination of most Americans now, because we've been living in such a collapse for so long. So I think I will stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Richard Black.
Thanks, Diane. I think what we're watching internationally with the pandemic destroying economies across the globe and the hideous famine hitting Central America, West Asia, Africa, is there are certain leading voices who are saying, where is humanity going? And looking at this fascist plan for universal banking fascism globally that Diane just described, there is a movement afoot to create an alternative rapidly. It's been building for a long time, but that movement is growing. Essentially, what's happened in the course of 2020, so I think you'll see there's been a dialogue between Helga LaRouche, the Russian Federation, President Putin and his representatives, and the nations of Africa. And what is being discussed is something radically different from what is being posed by the fascists out of the city of London. Go to the beginning of the year, early January. Within the first few days of January, Helga LaRouche called for a new paradigm of international relations. To achieve that, she called for the coming together of China, Russia, the United States, and India, the big four, for an emergency summit to deal with the global financial crisis, the moral crisis worldwide. Within days, President Putin of Russia called for a similar summit, in his case, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council. What then occurred is April, May, June, September, we of the Schiller Institute held international conferences with most of the major powers represented, scores of experts in science, policy, history, and at the same time, President Putin reiterated his call, there must be an international summit of the major nations. The world is facing an existential crisis. We face global war, nuclear war, and then when the pandemic hit, it became existential for all populations. And what's occurred in this developing period is this dialogue has matured. Specifically last month in October, 2 things of note occurred. Every year, the Russian intelligentsia has a big public meeting. It's called the Valdai International Discussion Club. It's held in Russia. Many of the top think tanks of the West are there as well. It's held over several days. And President Putin gave a quite profound speech. This was just a few weeks ago in late October, in which he said, among other things, the following. He said, "It is interesting that humanity has reached a very high level of technological and socioeconomic development, while at the same time facing the loss or the erosion of moral values and reference points. A sense that existence no longer has any meaning, and if you will, that the mission of humankind on the planet, the mission has been lost." And he went on to develop the idea. This was at the meeting. This was while Russia was the chairman of the BRICS group. He went on to outline an orientation around multilateralism and what was called by some a call for a new non-aligned movement. We're calling to the non-aligned movement of the 1960s. At the same time, at the BRICS international meeting, which just occurred a few days ago, there was intensive discussion by the vice president of the BRICS, the Russian chapter, Georgy Talaraya, who had spoken at a Schiller Institute associated conference about 5 years ago. Talaraya said, picking up on Putin's approach, we must have the United States involved. He said, in fact, I have a somewhat utopian view, perhaps. In the first half of 2021, President Putin's call will be realized for a P5 summit. I'm proposing that the heads of state of the BRICS nations, Russia, China, India, the United States, join that summit. for a grand international summit. He argued that without the United States involved, nothing is going to work. And at the same time, what he called, he said, a spectacular new start could be developed. So this is all coming out of the Russian leadership from a very intensive standpoint. President Putin has also called for an international summit on cybersecurity. He's called for an international summit involving the United States on the COVID pandemic. So the Russians, the Chinese, we've talked about a lot, are on a widespread international mobilization that a new paradigm of international relations has to be established. Now, at the same time in October, 7 nations from Africa, headed up by Nigeria, specifically the Speaker of the Nigerian Parliament, Mr. Gbajabiamila, has called for debt cancellation. And this is a weighty move. The nations this is a new group formed last summer of the speakers or the heads of the parliaments of 7 major nations in Africa. Those are Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Senegal, and South Africa. And it's expected that Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, and Cape Verde are considering joining. Most sharp and most eloquently discussed in October in demanding a new monetary system and debt cancellation is the Speaker of the Parliament in Ghana, Mr. Okoye. Here's what he said. He said, we need a new paradigm which cannot take place on the current economic arrangements. This is a game of robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's a never-ending cycle of poverty, misery, disease. He said, debt cancellation is a matter of liberating us. It is the final end of colonialism. And he went through in detail the fact that unless international trade is broken away from the great food cartels and multinationals, there will never be a solution. So essentially what you have going on is you have a discussion now of a new world economic order, the need of a new set of international relations. The call is coming from China, the call is coming from Russia in almost identical terms. The call is coming now from the major nations of Africa. This essentially is an organizing drive. The Schiller Institute will be having another major conference coming up December 12th and 13th in 3 weeks, in which this will be brought forward. So this is a call for a recommitment globally to the development of humanity as one humanity. And it is absolutely in response not only to the crisis of famine and disease, but to the fascist proposals that Diane was describing before. So I think I'll end there, and we can take up other matters afterwards.
Okay, Jason?
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'd like to talk about the broad image of what progress is, how to increase the productive power of labor, the basis of improvements in economy, productivity, living standards that we need to eliminate poverty from this planet completely very soon and achieve standards of living 10 times what they are today, not 20% better, 10 times, 1,000% better than what we have today. So if we look at the population of the planet, I just want to go through a few numbers here. I regret that I don't have a chart to show you. There were 1.5 billion people on this planet in 1900. There were 2 billion in 1928. There were 3 billion in 1960, 4 billion in 1975, 5 billion in 1987, 6 billion in 1999, 7 billion in 2011. And today we're almost at the level of 8 billion. We're at about 7.8 billion people on this planet. Now, people get alarmed by that. They say that we're growing exponentially, this is out of control, this is dangerous, we're using too many resources, because fundamentally, there's only so many resources. And if we keep growing, there won't be enough for everybody. So what we should do is either stop using resources as much overall, or prevent the development of parts of the world that are less developed right now, and say that you just have to stay that way so that we don't kill the planet. We'd rather kill you than kill the planet, you know. That's a terrible outlook. Now, one point I want to make about this. The rate of population growth, people think it's just expanding and expanding and expanding. It isn't, okay? It's slower now. The rate of increase of human population is slower now than it was 40 years ago, okay? So this Malthusian idea of reducing the world's population, that's actually happening in terms of the change in the rate of growth. But let's talk about what's the basis of that increase in human population. Why was it that we went from 1 billion people 200 years ago to almost 8 billion today? Was it because it wasn't because people, you know, had more kids or had more sex or anything like that. What this was about was making sure that people live longer. It was about preventing childbirth deaths, deaths of mothers in childbirth, or stillborns, or kids who wouldn't make it, past their 1st or 5th year, infant mortality. So the way that we were able to do all of that was by transforming the power of our labor. Let's think about agriculture as a start. So how do we create food? You might say, well, we could walk around and look for food, like on, Lost, or I'm sorry, like Alone, or one of these TV shows where people are roughing it out in the woods. But you can't really support many people just looking around for food. We produce it. So if you think about the first agriculture, that relied on human power, like actual human limbs doing things, and some animals, maybe to pull a plow or a cart or something like that. The amount of energy used in agriculture was very, very small. Now, today, a farmer has got, what do you have on a farm, on an advanced farm? You've got a tractor, you've got a harvester, you've got fertilizer. Where was the fertilizer produced? How much energy did that take? How much energy was required to produce that tractor for the farmer to use? How much fuel does that tractor, harvester, what have you, how much does it use? Irrigation, how much energy, how much effort goes into creating the energy that's needed to supply the irrigation needs, the pumping and all of that, and to lay out the water lines. So there's a huge amount of energy that goes into agriculture now. And you know what? It creates far more food. Agriculture overall is way more productive. We can feed more people on this planet because of that energy that we're putting in. Now, where does that energy, where does that technology come from? Where do these resources come from? They don't come from the earth. In a sense they do, but look, we make them. We create resources. A river is a resource in a certain sense if you can go fishing in it, or you can take a boat along it. That's fine. Well, what happens when you build a hydroelectric dam? You just turn that river into a source of electricity. And this was a big boost for the United States in our electricity production in the 30s and 40s and a little after that. Huge boost. The materials that we consider our resources today, we created them as resources. What a geologist 200 years ago or 150 years ago would say is an interesting mineral formation, today we would say, wow, now that's worth a lot. That's incredibly valuable. 150 years ago, uranium, it looks nice, interesting, kind of heavy. That's about it. Today, wow, that's a source of fuel. We created that resource. So when we do that, we increase the productive powers of labor by having more and more capital intensity, more equipment, more inputs that go into the actual final point of production. With the farmer, think about all the equipment that goes into running of a modern farm. In a factory, think about all the equipment that is available for each worker in a factory producing a product. So we increase those productive powers of labor and we develop entirely new resources. Now, when we stop doing that, that's when we run into problems. that's when we start seeming to run out of resources. Whereas when we create new ones, the amounts of these resources actually increase even while we are using them. So how about land? Can we make more land? Well, ask the Dutch. You can literally make more land by pushing back the ocean, but you can also change what kind of land you have. Like you might say, oh, you know, we don't have a lot of farmland here. We can't support people. Well, think about the Imperial Valley in California. California produces vast percentages of various fruits and nuts and things like this, and that no jokes intended there. Literally, fruits and nuts created in the United States come from California. You know, pistachios, almonds, the overwhelming majority. A lot of this stuff, this is done on land that used to be a desert. So was the land productive? We transformed that land. We created farmland. So we have taken crops that are better than the natural. Corn, it was like this big when we first started working on it thousands of years ago. And now you get a nice sized, delicious ear of corn. Animals. Animals have changed tremendously. Now, some of this is actually a little bit sad. Like, you don't really want to see videos of chickens and, you know, in a chicken farm run by Purdue or something. It's a little bit of an unpleasant sight. But these chickens are huge compared to the chickens, say, 50 years ago, the amount of meat you get on a chicken, which means that if you were producing chicken meat, we can make more of it with less input. We're more productive. Maybe in the future, we're just going to grow it directly in a lab and skip the whole rest of the animal that we don't eat altogether. I know that doesn't sound appetizing, but hey, you know what? Maybe it could be. And it would certainly be one way to help make sure that we can increase the availability of quality food to people on the planet. So in all of this, we really face a choice right now of if we are going to commit ourselves to being liberated from this burden of thinking that growth is bad, that technology is the cause of evils, that our advancement is causing misery and poverty and pollution and filth. If you think about in your mind what you would consider to be a very wealthy country or a wealthy area, is the water dirty? Are the streets full of trash? Actually, I'm kind of thinking of New York City right now, where you know you do get a lot of trash all over the place. But you know, on a country level, development creates cleaner conditions. You want to get rid of pollution in the world? Improve the economy, and don't just hide it the way people do right now. They say, "Oh, solar panels, these are really clean. I put them on my roof, very clean power." Well, what does the mine look like in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the raw materials to make those solar panels comes from? What are the conditions there? Is that clean and pollution free for the people working in them? It doesn't have to be that way, but it's a symptom of what we have when we have underdevelopment. So we need to free ourselves from this idea that growth is bad, that green is good, green isn't good, green ideology isn't good. It's anti-growth, it's anti-progressive, it's regressive, it's going backwards. And instead of having this green outlook, say, no, you know what, we're gonna go to other planetary, we're gonna go to the moon, we're gonna go to Mars, we're gonna head out there, we're gonna conquer space, we're gonna develop nuclear fusion, we're gonna be able to take on that no good asteroid that is on a collision course for Earth in 100 years that we just don't know about yet, or 5 years or 20 years. That's what we need to become. And it's not just a good idea, it really requires strongly rejecting the poison that is surrounding us and telling us that growth is bad and that we should essentially tolerate poverty and increasing poverty.
Okay, so I think we're probably ready to go to our discussion. Actually, I think we've already gotten some questions in. Let's see. There seems to be a question for you. Well, probably you can take it, Jason, which is, if I can see how this works. How does the New World Order benefit the British power structure?
So how have the British run an empire that conquered so much of the world while residing on this tiny island? How is it that the British Empire, which in its geographical literal extent, was enormous, even at the time of World War II. India, so many countries today in Africa had been colonized. How did that little place do it? Well, they've done it through direct control, through their militaries, through colonization. Today, it looks a little bit different. Now it's financial. It's a financial empire, although with plenty of military muscle too, provided by the US. So that financial empire in the city of London controls things through what we've seen just in the recent period, for example, with these supposed recovery programs due to COVID, where some of the money goes to people with the Paycheck Protection Program or things like this, expanded unemployment benefits. But trillions of dollars have gone into building up the stock market, of just increasing the size of that financial bubble. So what the British are pushing right now, what Mark Carney in particular, the former head of the Bank of England, has been promoting, is to make all investment into the future green and to move towards a digitalization of currencies. This doesn't mean just that you're going to have to use Venmo to buy everything, or Apple Pay or whatever. What this would mean is the ability to eliminate cash and therefore be able to drive interest rates down below zero, so that any money that you're holding, it actually just sort of decreases over time. You have a negative interest rate in your bank account. And what that would do would be to increase even more the amount of money that's going into pure finance when sucking it out of the real economy. So since the British Empire, the British financial empire, is based on a control through finance and through ideologies, they seek to achieve those aims by this financialization of the world economy and by preventing growth through green ideology and through promoting a geopolitical outlook that says that your gain is my loss. Where some Americans, particularly in DC, say, oh, Russia, if they're doing well, that's bad for us. If they're independent, that's bad for us. If China's growing, that's bad for us. That's a British idea. It's not an American idea, and we should rid ourselves of it.
Okay.
Can I say something
Sure.
for a sec? Just, if you think about this question, and actually I'm sure Dennis Speed and Richard Black have both have thoughts on this. I mean, what does it mean to have an empire? What does it mean to have a royal family? If you think about the Habsburgs, they all looked funny because they were so inbred, because only, you had to have the right bloodline, like a Wagnerian opera, right? You have to marry everyone in your family to keep the bloodline pure. I mean, it's really sick. What's the difference between a human being and a horse? People who do horse breeding, that's how the British Empire thinks about the human race. And what was so revolutionary about the United States is that our founding fathers, going back to Nicholas of Cusa, going back to Joan of Arc, they said, no, every single human being is unique from the animal species, has an innate divine quality, which is not in our physical body. It's not in whether you have blonde hair or red hair, or what color your eyes are, or how strong or tall or short or fat you are. It's in your mind and your ability to make a creative discovery, something not like a computer, but something that was never in your mind before, or maybe never even in the mind of all of humanity before. But there's some kind of problem, a paradox that you're confronted with, and you get an insight. And suddenly, like whoever the first person was who figured out how to use a wheel, for example, or the first person who figured out how to use fire, the fact that we made those discoveries, someone did, transformed the entire human race. And it had nothing to do with what color their hair was. The British imperial view of man is sort of like Zeus, the god who wanted to punish Prometheus in perpetuity for bringing fire to man, for bringing discoveries, because when your mind is free, then you cannot be enslaved. And it becomes obvious that no one by matter of birthright should be allowed to rule over everyone else. And so therefore, the principles in the American Constitution and Declaration of Independence were a terrible threat. And the economic system that allowed us to realize them, which was designed by Alexander Hamilton, was a terrible threat to this imperial way of life. And they've spent a great deal of effort dumbing us down and getting us to believe in the almost like a worship of money, of the stock market, and also individuals who figure out how to get rich are supposed to be somehow glorified, as opposed to people who just work really hard and do good for humanity. So it's an imperial system, which is the evil, and it's really anti-American. And I think there's a kernel inside Americans that resist this, but it's urgent that we make people more conscious of it.
Richard, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, well, colonialism is still very much alive. People think that the colonial period is over. Colonial period is not over. And there are several forms of control. Most people in the US don't realize that of the many French-speaking African nations, about 24 of them, their currency, they don't print their own currency. Their currency is printed in Paris. By law, they're forced to maintain their national monetary reserves in banks in Paris. These nations are completely controlled by the old colonial masters in Paris, in London, etc. A second element of control is the control in the mind. If you're an African leader, you know that there have been decades of assassinations of African leaders who spoke the truth. The president of Burkina Faso in 1987 said that the IMF and the bankers who were sent to run the economies, they were called technical assistants, but they should be called technical assassins. And that president in 87 was then promptly assassinated. So if it's the case that the major powers, if Russia is reaching out to the United States and joining with India under the great Gandhi who fought the empire, joining with China and its Belt and Road, and then there's a reflexive movement in what we used to call the Third World of nations, of the major nations, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, etc., saying the debt is illegitimate. It's canceled. We're not paying it. It doesn't exist. If this is driven forward, then you could bring about an end finally to colonialism. But because we Americans play a major role, every one of us have to be part of a force to make the United States again a revolutionary force. The way the United States was looked at by many African leaders in the 50s and 60s, when Jack Kennedy was senator, when Jack Kennedy became president, and he was a fighter for just such an independence movement, a new system, and then he was assassinated. So these are long-term battles, unfinished, and our responsibility and our freedom is to finish those battles now. That's the importance of Putin's speeches. That's the importance of these initial moves by these major African heads of parliaments throughout the continent.
Got a few other questions. I'm actually going to put these two together, and one is from Jay, and he says, "What I observed as a voting chairperson is most egregious. Despite that, contacting everyone from the Board of Elections to government agencies to attorneys has been fruitless. Honor has left the nation." That's sort of what it says. So, and then the second comment, which just came in, which is from Brian, says, "Rudy Giuliani on his Common Sense YouTube broadcast today emphasized Lord Malik Brown. He emphasized how this is the worst criminal activity case he has taken." So Diane, let me just give you those together and then we can get comments from others.
Okay, great. Well, again, the fact that Trump is able to fight this and they have a case means that there is hope, because enough Americans have stood up that they can discover tens of thousands of votes that were stolen. And what has been tapped into with the Smartmatic, which Brian is referring to, and I guess Giuliani did, Lord Malik Brown, is a systemic fraud done digitally. Lord Malik Brown was someone known to LaRouche 30 years ago. We've written about him. He is from the House of Lords, as his name implies. And what people should know is that in 2018, December 18th, 2018, the House of Lords issued a report saying that Donald Trump could not be allowed to serve a second term, that his first term was bad enough, but if he served a second term as president, that this would destroy the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain, which should have long since been destroyed. But at any rate, and they reference explicitly Trump's pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords. So this Malik Brown is sort of a key, it's like a red dye marker for the apparatus, as we're saying, run completely out of London. The other thing I just want to say, and people may have more, is that I'm hoping that it's becoming clear from what Richard said, the natural allies in this situation for the United States are China and Russia. They are committed to sovereignty and they have the power and the scientific capability to be sovereign. Also, India, which has, it's a little more dicey because of the British legacy there, but would be a very important partner. So think about what all of these scandals have been directed at. Trump is a puppet of Putin, as Nancy Pelosi says. What is that designed to do? To stop Trump from meeting with Putin. The Pompeo witch hunt, at the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, running this racist witch hunt against China. Every Chinese student is spying on us. The story that, you know, the Chinese supposedly deliberately unleashed the coronavirus, which is absurd. We're not even scientifically certain that the virus originated in China. There's some interesting questions coming up now, but at any rate, what is this designed to do? To stop the United States from working with the nations that would be its natural allies in this moment, and to drive us back into the lap of the British monarchy. And I think that's something that Americans really have to understand. It's not, communism is not the threat to the United States right now. It's fascism, and it's from the City of London.
Anybody else?
Yeah, at the recent international meeting of the BRICS nations, which just occurred last week. Again, Russia was this year the rotating chairman. One of the national chairman of the BRICS for Russia, a man by the name of Nikonov, he's also a member of the Duma, of the lower house in Russia. He made the point that what the COVID crisis has underscored is the importance of national sovereignty, national development, and national economic development. And he said that the pandemic has underscored the importance of the Westphalian system. That is, without a strong sovereign nation state and multiple nation states, we're defenseless to defeat the pandemic. So this is somewhat reflexive. If you remember President Trump's speech at the UN, the key concept that he developed is national sovereignty. We're not giving ourselves up to globalist institutions of world government. Each nation has to develop itself to its own greatness. So in somewhat different language, but absolutely congruent, there's a discussion coming from President Trump, President Putin, China, absolutely, from the standpoint of the one China policy, that a sovereign nation state is a key invention what Jason just went through, a key invention of mankind in order to move mankind forward and to defeat enemies such as the COVID.
Well, I'll just make a remark about Lord Moloch. Some people don't know that there's a Canaanite god by the name of Moloch, and he was known for he was the god of child sacrifice, and you did these sacrifices either through war or you did them through famine. But that's what he was, and there's a section from Leviticus, I think it is, if I can remember it. I will set my face against that man and against his family and cut him off. I forget it, and all that go whoring after him to commit whoredom with Moloch. So Lord Moloch Brown, who is this associate of George Soros, is aptly named. Of course, he's the head of this smart tech company, which was the company that ran the voting machines for the election. And the House of Lords, of which he's a member, had said that there's no way they could tolerate a second Trump administration. Not to mention that, of course, there's also the fact that Soros and Moloch Brown have been known for their involvement in what are called color revolutions. Moloch Brown was very involved in the overthrow of Ferdinand Marcos in 1986 and with Cory Aquino. Was one of the first things. It was called the Yellow Revolution. And of course, Soros has financed many of the other color revolutions. There's the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. There has been the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon. There was the Rose Revolution, I think it was, in Georgia. There's a revolution in Belarus, so forth and so on. And all these have been financed by Soros's people. When Mark Carney talks about financial regime change, it's the same thing. But what this is all about is a reorganization of the financial system. And the notion is that everybody's going to be sacrificed. The future will be sacrificed, mortgaged, killed to the Canaanite gods, the gods of what used to be called the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, and other cities. That's what you're looking at here. So it's probably useful for people to think about this character as not a real person, but what he actually is biblically, a god of sacrifice. And the fact that Giuliani's talking about him is a plus for Rudy. And it's important that I think we all understand. It's also a way of backing into talking about the British imperial system, which of course is a Lyndon LaRouche bailiwick. So a lot of people are a little bit shy about getting into what you might call the LaRouche wheelhouse. Nonetheless, I think they're going to back into it, and we will certainly help them make this clear. The fraud that was done on the presidency was run through British intelligence, and it is a foreign intervention into the American election. It is exactly what people claim to be so hyped up about around Russiagate. And now we're going to find out how patriotic Americans really are. Are they prepared to actually look at their age-old enemy, the British imperial system, and see it for what it is? And I think that's going to be an interesting discussion that will be happening in the country over the next days. I think that's it on the question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add something on that too, on this on Moloch Brown here. So on Smartmatic, some people have been looking at the fact that the two of the creators of Smartmatic were Venezuelan, or Venezuelan. Well, they were Venezuelans who had moved to the United States and lived in Florida at the time. But the SGO, the company that owns Smartmatic, 4 people on the board. Okay, so Moloch Brown, he's the chairman of Smartmatic. The parent company, SGO, is Moloch Brown, Lord Moloch Brown, these 2 Venezuelans, and then Sir Nigel Knowles, who was knighted in 2009 and served the Queen as the High Sheriff of London from 2016 to 2017. In terms of who Moloch Brown is, he became a life peer in 2007. He was made a baron. He was made a knight commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, which I guess means wearing another silly costume. He was brought into the Queen's Privy Council. He is George Soros's boss. So this is another thing that people look at backwards. They say, oh, Venezuela's running our elections. No, Britain's running our, that's British. Or they say, oh, George Soros is running the elections. Well, Malik Brown is running George Soros, okay? It's not the other way around. The Brits are in control on this thing. He was key in creating the idea of responsibility to protect, which was Tony Blair's assault on the principle of the nation state, which Richard Black was referring to. It said if something bad is happening somewhere in the world, you can go in and overthrow that government to support the poor oppressed people who, of course, are always going to be well served by a military invasion that destabilizes their country and kills their leaders, like Gaddafi. Malik Brown was all in favor of going after Gaddafi, which has still left Libya in chaos. He helped create the International Criminal Court, working with Soros. So, this, the fact that you look at this election thing and it goes straight to the full outlook of the British, I think is something that, I'm glad that Giuliani's going with that. And if you follow that all the way, it'll help make some breakthroughs into rethinking some of our other policies, like our stupid economic, the stupid aspects of our economic policy or of military policy.
Okay, so we're at about 3 minutes to go here, Diane. So you want to, what do you want to do?
I guess everyone should say if they have something they want to say before we finish up. Closing remarks, if anyone has anything.
Well, Jason seems to be saying no, he's good.
I said what I said.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, that leaves it to you, Diane.
Well, I would just tell everyone who's been out there at these Trump trains and fighting as you are to continue. I would urge people, we have had occasion to launch an upgrade of the LaRouche Movement's intelligence service, Executive Intelligence Review. You can subscribe at LaRouchePub.com. Our publications are really excellent and people should be reading them. In fact, everyone here on this panel has written for the publication. So I'd encourage that. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Dennis Speed is going to be engaged, as I will be joining him, but with Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Harley Schlanger. And people should tune in at 2 o'clock at schillerinstitute.com. So that's what I think I have to say. And Dennis, if you have anything you want to say about tomorrow's meeting, why don't you share that?
Well, I'll just say something. Yes, that'll be at 2 o'clock. It's a meeting of the Schiller Institute. And the title for the meeting, the basic idea is, will the digital theft of the United States election spark a worldwide resistance to global fascism? What we're going to be taking up there is the idea that if you don't stop the theft that happened in the United States, you don't know that you'll have another fair and free election anywhere else in the world. So we'll be taking this topic up. Helga Zepp-LaRouche will be speaking. Harley Schlanger, well known as a blogger and also because of his role in the LaRouche organization's video world, will also be with us. And so we would definitely urge everybody to be with us that day or tomorrow and to get our publications. So on behalf of the New York Symposium with Diane Sare, we just say, stay informed, stay optimistic, and stay truthful.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we are offline off YouTube.